Thank you. The days after Christmas are an emotional roller coaster. I think of the words of Jesus. Do not think that I have come to bring peace upon the earth. I have come to bring not peace, but the sword. On Christmas Day, we celebrated the birth of the Christ child, a day full of joy. The problem is the next day, we dealt with the death of Stephen. He was stoned to death because of his discipleship of this Christ child. The following day, December 27th, we had the feast of St. John, the disciple of love. But then the very next day, we are dealing with blood again, the killing of the holy innocents. Now today, the feast of the Holy Family is upon us. It would be easy to have an image of harmonious family living in love. The reality was different. The birth of Jesus took place in a hostile place. No welcome at the inn. By the way, normally today we'd have the feast of Thomas Becket, murder in the cathedral. So he was murdered in his own cathedral at Canterbury, southeast England. Before the family returned to Nazareth, they found themselves needing to flee to Egypt. So the Holy Family caught in the middle of, you say, the will of heaven and the will of earth. In today's Gospel, Mary and Joseph find themselves dealing with the Son who was following the will of heaven. Jesus stays behind in the temple, and his parents are forced to spend 3 days looking for him. Mary rebukes him. Son, why have you done this to us? At the age of 12, we find that God's will is taking over from human will. Jesus attests to the obligation that he feels. I must be in my Father's house. More than once he refers to this sense of compulsion. I must preach the good news in other towns. The Son of Man must suffer. The will of the Father now takes precedence over the will of Mary and Joseph. The will of God is built into most things here on earth. Plants and animals, some have their own limit in the way they act and the way they grow and so on. Human beings are different because of free will. At the same time, there is a need to blend in and cooperate with creation and with the Creator. Through Jesus, we have a common identity. We get to call God Father. Mary and Joseph, by observing the feast of Passover every year, were acknowledging God as Father of their own lives. They were complying with the will of heaven. The alternate reading that's given for today, the first reading was from the book of Samuel. In that reading, Hannah, full of faith and trust in God, is like Mary, waiting on God's plan to unfold. They did not have advanced knowledge of where things were going. There was no roadmap for them to follow. Hannah presented her son to God in Shiloh. She would surrender him to the service of God. Mary, too, needed to surrender Jesus into the service of his Father. Sometimes our obligation to God supersedes our obligation to our own family. Mary kept all these things in her heart. No, she didn't know the way forward. She didn't have advanced knowledge of what was going to happen. So there was an adjusting again and again to the needs of the moment. What Luke, the writer, seems to highlight is the yes to the unknown. That's Mary's yes to the unknown. In some way, that message is for us too, every one of us. You don't know the future of your life. You don't know what plan God has for you, or what is the will of heaven for you in the coming days and weeks and months. And yet you have to commit yourself to this discipleship of this child, of this Christ child born to us. Every parent is familiar with that at some level, that the future of a child is unknown, and yet they accept that in faith. All parents are asked to say yes to the will of heaven. This year we read from the Gospel of Luke. His Gospel begins and ends in the temple. At the beginning, Zacchaeus, the father of John the Baptist, has his vision there, and at the end of the Gospel, the disciples of Jesus are in the temple praying and rejoicing. The will of heaven was taking precedence over everything else. Luke, as a writer, engages in a unique dynamic. Family episodes are brought and introduced in the temple. Temple liturgy, on the other hand, is brought to the fields and family homes. In a manner of speaking, we bring heaven home with us. The way of heaven becomes our way. Model families in the Bible see their children as belonging to God. Abraham and Sarah, Hannah and Elkanah, Zechariah and Elizabeth, and now Joseph and Mary. Their children are first fruits offered back to God. Family life is a sacrament of the Trinity, the triune God, even in its imperfection. Family life is a place we learn to love and forgive. The Holy Family has been referred to as created Trinity. They reflect the divine love of heaven that is now shared with us on earth. The history of the devotion of the Holy Family first took place in France in the mid-17th century. It was brought to the United States by the Jesuits. 1921, the feast received official status under Pope Benedict XV. It put new emphasis on divine love being made visible in the context of a human family living on earth. We stand for the Creed. I believe in one God, the Father.
So some of you may know today is the feast of the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And so a lot of times we hear about them as that example of what it means to be a family, to love each other, to love one another. Today, I want to look at our second reading because I think it gives us a lot of good advice on how to be first a family within our own immediate family, but also a parish family. Because we're going to need to really support each other in these coming months and weeks. And so it's really important, a lot of what St. Paul has to say here, because it's going to apply within our own families, but also here in our parish family as we go through this transition. Put on, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, heartfelt compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. Especially with this time of transition and grief, little things are going to become much bigger than they would have normally been. And so we have to make sure that we're willing to not hold it against each other. Because as soon as you start holding it against each other, you're no longer working together. Mistakes aren't a bludgeon to hit other people over the head with. Right? They're mistakes. And we all make them. And we're all going to make them. And we all need everyone else to forgive us, and so we need to make sure we forgive others too. And it's hard, especially when we're angry or frustrated. But the other person's probably angry and frustrated too. We're all hurting, and so we all need to help each other. Having that patience that, I really want to yell at you right now, but I'm not. I'm going to take some time to calm down, to love you and to cherish you because you're made in God's image and likeness. You're my child, you're my husband, you're my wife, you're my mom, you're my dad, grandparent, aunt, uncle, fellow parishioner. Over all of these, put on love. That is the bond of perfection. And let the peace of Christ control your hearts. That's another important part. Putting on love, putting on Christ. We can't do this on our own. Christ needs to be the center of our lives. Our family life, our parish life. When He's there, when that love of Christ is in the center, we can weather all things. Because we're not relying on our strength to make it through. We're relying on His. And His strength is endless. Ours is very finite. So let's put Him at the center. Remembering that He's the one that will unite us, brings us together, strengthens us, and sustains us, and gives us that witness of true love that we can follow. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. In all wisdom you teach and admonish one another, singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. And whatever you do in word or in deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him. Again, helping each other out lovingly. So when you notice someone's not necessarily being as charitable or patient, like, hey, remember, we need to be patient with each other. Now, sometimes if you're the one causing the patience not to be good, have somebody else mention that, because it's not always best for the person who's trying the patience. But let's work on that. Let's strengthen our families by letting Christ guide us, by being lovingly corrective of each other, both in our personal families, but here in our parish family as well. That's the beauty of our church, is that we're not alone. We have people to rely on. We have people to reach out to here, to support each other, to help each other. So let us do that. Let us rely on one another and on Christ. And together, we can make it through all things. Together, we can strengthen one another. And together, we can overcome all things.